Welcome back to another episode of the Global Trial Accelerators podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Jason Hurt, MD, MBA, founder and CEO of Theragnostic Insights. After 2 decades in oncology drug development, Jason launched his consultancy in 2025 to accelerate next-generation radioligand therapies. As former chief medical officer at Orano Med, he led breakthrough targeted alpha programs using lead-212 isotopes. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Jason.
Yeah, that's good. Perfect.
All right, including the landmark 212 PV dotamtate trial for neuroendocrine tumors. Beyond the science, Jason mentors emerging researchers, and fun fact, he still finds time for medical missions and golf. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Julio. It's a pleasure to be here and good to connect with you again.
Thank you, Jason, for being here.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's start with your journey, Jason. You have a fascinating story. You were an MD, practicing MD, seeing patients, and then you transitioned into the industry. You became a leader in drug development, all that. How did it all happen?
How did that happen?
Yeah.
So I grew up in like a small middle-class family in Texas. My father was a carpenter.
Oh, really? Wow.
But I knew that I always wanted to be a doctor from the time I was 8 years old. And so I grew up with working with my father. That wasn't always the best idea, but he and I are very much alike. So sometimes the personalities clash. And I just always wanted to be a physician. So I went to medical school in Texas. And while I was in medical school, I couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do surgery. So I went into a couple of surgical options, and I ended up doing gynecology. And so I was in doing that, and I was a fellow in gynecologic oncology is where I learned kind of the basics of cancer and cancer surgery and things like that, chemotherapy. I left fellowship after I had some health issues with my eyes and some other things. And if you have issues with your eyes, it's very difficult to operate.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So I ended up going into general practice, and then decided about a year into it that I didn't want to do this anymore. And there was a number of signs that I'm glad 15, 16 years ago I saw. Most of the physicians were becoming hospital employees and things like that.
Yeah.
Insurance was getting to be horrible then, and it's even worse now.
Yeah.
I was in my early 30s, and I had decided that if I was going to do anything with my career, I was really going to have to figure out what to do. And I decided that I was going to get into the drug development industry. And so I had a very nice CV from academics, and hired somebody on Craigslist to write me a resume.
Wow.
I posted it on a job board, and in about 3 months, a recruiter called me from a CRO here in Cincinnati. Okay. And that's what made it. So we moved from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, and I've been here ever since. So I was really hang on. Can you hear me? No.
Yes.
So there was just a little cut up there. So I was really glad to get into the industry, and I learned, my 4 years at the CRO, I learned a ton about clinical drug development. And so from there, I went to a couple of smaller biotechs, and in 2019, I was looking for another job because the company I was at the time was looking to commercialize, and they really didn't have a real need for a drug developer, right? It was mostly commercial. And so I was recruited by a company called Orano Med that was based in Dallas, or outside of Dallas. and I was there for about 4.5, 5 years, and really got into the radiopharmaceutical space after that.
Hmm.
During the same time, I did my MBA because I really wanted a little more, business aspect of it
Yeah.
from,
Hmm.
from a business point of view. Because
Yeah.
physicians, I'm sure we don't have any business training,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so it was nice to go back to school. And my kids say, you know, you are a professional student. All you've done is go to school. How did you how did you do that? And so it was very easy. It wasn't easy. It was the same thing that I'd always done. I always had 2 or 3 jobs, so it was not any different. And then in March of this past year, a colleague of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm changing jobs. Let's make a partnership together." And we kind of strung
Hmm.
together the idea of doing um, consulting for clinical trials with radiopharmaceuticals. She had done quite a bit of industry work in radiopharmaceuticals, and I thought it was the perfect idea. The other thing that she had brought up was this clinical trial site that we've talked about, and because we had been in the clinical trial space, we knew kind of the shortcomings of the academic and the hospital system clinical trial infrastructure, if you will,
Hmm.
and the lack of the real expertise for radiopharmaceutical trials. So we launched that in March, and we're looking to we're currently trying to raise funds for that. As you know, it's a capital intensive investment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're working on two. We're going to discuss the details later, but you're working in two
Yeah.
areas: setting up that clinical trial site for radiopharmaceuticals, and you're
Hmm.
also working on your consultancy
Right.
practice or firm.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So the consultancy, they kind of both started at the same time.
Okay.
Um, we went live in May. We started in
Yes.
March and went live in May.
Okay.
So that's doing well. So revenue is coming in. So that's not only good for me, but it's good for our company that we're recognized as somebody that can really help out these smaller biotechs that don't have a lot of money, but really need the expertise to
Yeah.
get from the preclinical aspect into the clinic.
Excellent. All right. So let's talk about trends, Jason, before we get into the nitty gritty details of what you guys are doing on setting up this trial site and your consultancy venture. Let's talk about what's happening in the industry. What's the bottleneck that I hear about? Why is it difficult to set up trial sites? Why is it there's more demand for a research site than the actual offer? So let's talk about trends. What's happening?
Yeah. So the radiopharmaceutical industry is quite interesting, and it reminds me of kind of the immunotherapy um, explosion in the early part of the decade,
Yeah.
in the 2013, sometime around there, with really just remarkable results from these products. And so when I got into it about 6 or 7 years ago, Lutathera had just been approved for use in neuroendocrine tumor patients. That's really different than kind of the rest of the world. They were really way ahead of the U.S. in terms of radioligand therapies for a number of
Hmm.
reasons that we can get into later. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, the U.S. was behind, and a lot of it had to do with training and you know the oncologists who were involved in it and who weren't necessarily involved in it. So a lot of stuff, a lot of things happened that we were just behind. And so Lutathera was done a lot in Europe, so and elsewhere in the world, and so there was a lot of data from elsewhere in the world. And at the time, there was very few things that the nuclear medicine guys did in terms of clinical research, right? So there's a big difference between doing research project for a diagnostic compared to a
Yeah.
therapeutic, right?
Yeah.
And so that just kind of let it all, it just exploded. And in the end of 23 and pretty much all of 24, there was billions of dollars going into the industry, right? For mergers and acquisitions, CDMO development, um, uh, logistics for supply chain, because the logistics of this and the supply chain of these radiopharmaceuticals is crucial to the success of everybody, right? And so it stands to reason that there needed to be a lot of capital in this to be able to supply whatever radioisotope is necessary to get it to patients when needed. But again, as we discussed before, the ultimate prize in drug development is FDA approval, right? FDA approval requires a lot of money, and it requires a lot of data that is collected from clinical trials. Um, and in the industry, there are clinical trial sites. There's about 22 or 23 or so that are called that are graded by the SNMMI as centers of excellence. But those are those are limited, right? And so if those sites are they have all the patients, then there's other people can't get there because they don't have any room there. Then it warrants other sites that can tackle that.
Yeah.
So our idea is to, one of the bottlenecks, again, as we talked about, is the clinical trial size and the relationship between nuclear medicine physicians and the oncologists. Because in the U.S., the oncologists are the gatekeepers of the patient, right? You just don't go to a nuclear medicine site and say, "Hey, I want to do this."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we came up with this idea, and we thought it was a pretty good one. And so that's the bottleneck that we're hoping to open, right?
Yeah.
So we can get these drugs studied quicker, get the data, and get it submitted to the FDA for the ultimate prize of FDA approval.
All right. So why is it so difficult to set up a trial site for these type of therapies, Jason?
Two main reasons. One is the capital investment. So for a specific radiologic clinical trial site or radiopharmaceutical clinical trial site, it's got to be set up to handle radiation, which means lead lining of the walls, shielding from the radiation from various isotopes. There's got to be specific HVAC, accommodations for the CT scanner, the PET scanner. You also have to have very specialized workforce that is kind of lacking in the U.S. So radiopharmacists, radiochemists, nuclear medicine techs, nuclear medicine physicians. Not all physicians like to do clinical research, right? And again, it's the capital investment of the imaging equipment. So, for example, in a hospital system, they're sharing, clinical development with radiopharmaceuticals with routine medical care. So, the typical things that the radiology department does, CT scans, so there's always something going on. Our proposal is to have a standalone unit with imaging capabilities.
So most of the existing trial sites are at academic institutions. Is that where?
Correct.
Is that a fact?
Okay. And most of them are typically oncology-based clinical trial sites.
Oncology-based.
Right? So meaning that they do a plethora of clinical trials from a number of different molecules. And so they're very well set up for that. They're very used to doing that. It's just when you start doing these clinical trials in the U.S., some of the institutions have to catch up. and they're
I
not
see.
always willing to pitch up.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about cyclotrons. So you don't really need to set up your own production cyclotron
No,
setup.
no, no.
Okay.
So,
You can
so that's
buy
yeah,
from a third party that has a cyclotron in the area.
yeah, yeah. So the way it is now, so a lot of academic centers, universities, and things like that have a cyclotron that they can produce whatever, astatine, whatever radioisotope it is. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to have the radiopharmaceutical either pre-made and sent to the site in time for dosing. There are some generators, not necessarily cyclotrons, but generators that can make
Generators.
some
Okay.
that can make a radioisotope. But yeah, we're not. Yeah, we're clinicians, right? So our expertise is not in running a cyclotron.
That requires another set of
Yeah,
challenges and
that's
skills.
that's a totally other issue. So this is kind of the thing with clinical drug development. So in oncology, clinicians, are used to doing these types of trials, cancer trials and things like that. What they're not necessarily used to doing is being a part of a radiopharmaceutical trial.
I see. I see. Okay. Interesting. So, well, you know that my focus has been on OUS, outside of the United States, first in human research, more specifically in Latin America. Do you see space for Latin America to try to alleviate this bottleneck?
Yeah, I think so. Because there just the sheer number of patients, right? So the in the community, there's in these other countries, there may not be access to a top-notch academic site, right? There may not be that type of access. So yeah, I believe in the community. If we can get these in closer into the community, yes, absolutely.
Yes,
It
we
meets that unmet medical need.
exactly, exactly. That's what we think. I don't know if I told you when you and I first met, but we are setting up a cyclotron in Colombia at one of the leading institutions in the country and one of the leading hospitals in Latin America. And we're setting up a whole radiopharmaceutical and theranostic program, heavily
Yeah.
focused on research to try to
Yes.
alleviate this bottleneck that we're discussing, hoping that by having a value proposition where we can execute these trials faster, easier, and cheaper in South America, will bring a lot of business to the country
Yeah.
and to benefit patients. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the push is going towards there, right? Because in clinical drug development, the prize, or the data that you collect is gold, right? And so if you have more patients that you can collect more data from, that benefits everybody.
Agree. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. All right, Jason. So let's talk a little bit about your consultancy. What exciting project are you working on without disclosing
Yeah,
confidential information?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm working with a couple of CROs and a couple of smaller biotechs right now. I can't really name, but what we provide is a lot of expertise outside of the typical clinical drug development. So there's a lot of issues with sites when you go to the sites in the U.S. and things like that. So a lot of people said that it's very similar to oncology clinical trials, and it is, and that backbone is there, but it's not necessarily just oncology trials. There's some specific things for radiopharmaceuticals that you really have to know. So with our consultancy, we do like interim chief medical officer for companies. We can do medical monitoring. We do initiations. We have a regulatory person. We also have a CMC consultant. So essentially anything that goes with your clinical trial for radiopharmaceuticals, we could probably help out with.
That's excellent. What about the CRO, now that you just mentioned CROs? Is it also bottleneck in that space? Do we have enough CROs to...
No, it may be. It may be because there's a number of CROs that are trying to get into the space now, right? And are looking for expertise to help them to kind of break into that space because, again, there's a lot of money going into radiopharmaceutical drug development, right? And so the CROs are really trying to get their hands on these types of things. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a bottleneck, but all the CROs got to have their clinical trial sites that they go to that they prefer, and we aim to be one of those.
Of course, yeah. Beautiful, excellent. All right, Jason, we're getting close to the end of the show. Any final words of wisdom? Any final comments you want to make to the audience?
Yeah, I think the time is right for radiopharmaceuticals. There's a lot of smart people coming in from both sides of the bridge, where we're on the preclinical and the chemistry and the physics and all of that stuff. And there's a lot of smart people coming in on the other side from the clinical drug development world. And we don't necessarily speak the same language, but we have to get to the same place. And it's exciting to see what's on the other side. And I hope they're just as excited to see what's on our side as we get closer and closer to FDA approval.
Yeah. So, Jason, before we conclude, something else that's been bugging me a little bit. You mentioned something about some countries where they have a lead over the United States. Can you mention some of those countries?
Yeah,
Why
yeah. So
do they have a lead over the U.S.?
Germany's a big one. Australia's a big one, and a lot of the companies, Japan and China's even making a move now.
Wow.
So there's a lot of interest outside the U.S. and the rest of the world, and it's just one of those things that happen. And so we're trying to catch up with the workforce issue and the expertise to get these things approved.
Yeah. Well, Germany, yes, makes sense. Japan, yeah, maybe makes sense. But Australia, you never hear about much Australian innovation coming out of it. I mean, what's going on there?
Yeah. So one of the biggest radiopharmaceutical companies is Telix. I believe Clarity is there too, maybe Curium. But they're, for early clinical trials, they have a lot of benefits to get there. Some monetary benefits and incentives to do them there, and so they've done them there, and it's really quite nice.
Oh yes, they have these tax rebate. I think it's called 43.5% back of whatever you invest in a clinical trial. That's why a lot of startups, especially in biopharma and medical devices spaces, go there.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the key things.
Excellent.
So,
all right.
Time is money for doing clinical drug development.
Beautiful. So you're validating what we're doing in South America, Jason. For your information, we're looking to set up at least 5 more of this in the next year. More programs like the one that I just described in Colombia. Just in Colombia, I think the country itself is a country of about 55 million people now. I think the country can easily support 5 different advanced programs like this, each one with their own cyclotron, or probably 2 cyclotrons that serve the sites. Brazil, we're speaking with one of the leading hospitals in South America, in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So yeah, it looks like it's going to be a bright future for this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything I can do to help, please let me know.
Excellent, Jason. Thank you so much for being on the show. I enjoyed our conversation. I hope that the audience learned a lot from you.
I do too. Thanks, Leo. Take care.